So, I promised this one a while ago. Both Superman and Spider-Man are two of the most popular superheroes ever. Sorry, Batman, you already got your video. And both had groundbreaking first two movies, only to be followed up by disappointing sequels and reboots. But Spidey does have one more on Supes, now that his latest adaptation was good too. This isn't the only reason why I'm making this comparison. Spider-Man paid a lot of respects to Superman. Even though this movie came out at the turn of the millennium, when everything was dark and edgy, it took a lot of inspiration from the bright, fun tone of Superman from decades earlier. There are a lot of references and scenes that go similarly. Also, both films not only played a significant role in film history, but are closely tied to US history in general. The character of Superman was created in the 1930s during the Great Depression and was a symbol of optimism in one of America's darkest moments. I don't know if it was a coincidence or what, because that symbol came onto the big screen at a time when the nation needed that optimism once again. The 1970s were a time of recession, war weariness, and political instability, and Superman came back. Now, the Spider-Man movie also came out when he was most needed too. It came to theaters only a couple of months after the September 11th attacks. And of course, being set in New York, it was impossible to ignore. Even a scene from the trailers had to be cut due to it featuring the Twin Towers. But Spider-Man displayed New Yorkers joining together to save the day from the murderous villain. And how can we forget that American flag? It was the exact movie that the nation needed at the time. So Spider-Man is like this century's Superman. And that's why I'm comparing the two. So which superhero movie is better? Superman or Spider-Man? Let's take a look. One of the advantages of being the first to do something is that you don't have to worry about setting yourself apart from other installments. Superman was the first Superman movie, and Spider-Man was the first Spider-Man movie. These two movies cast a large shadow over every other movie about their character, and being different for the sake of being different is a large factor to why the other movies are brought down. The originals just tell the stories that everybody knows and loves. We all know the story behind Superman. When he was a baby, his planet Krypton was about to explode, so his parents shot him off to Earth where he would survive. Kal-El, later named Clark Kent, then grows up in Kansas and then fights evildoers in Metropolis. Or New York. It's literally just New York. And everybody knows Spider-Man. Peter Parker was just your average nerdy teen who got cursed with spider powers. After using his powers only for monetary gain, he lets a robber go, that robber kills his Uncle Ben, and that teaches him to use his powers responsibly. Then Peter uses his powers to fight crime. So that's the simplified version of both films. On one hand, you have the god learning how to be human, and on the other is a human learning how to be a god. They're both classic stories, but only one is better. In my opinion, Spider-Man handles the origin better than Superman. We just get to see more of him developing into Spider-Man. We see Peter being a nerd in school, him getting bitten by the genetically engineered super spider. Peter gets his powers, experiments with them. We see Uncle Ben telling the classic "with great power comes great responsibility" line. Peter uses his powers to win money, lets a robber get away. The robber kills Uncle Ben. He catches the robber, and he realizes that Uncle Ben would be alive if he didn't let the robber go. And in the end, he uses his powers to be Spider-Man. So we get the full origin, and none of it is rushed through. The movie takes the time to show us each detail of how Spider-Man came to be. Except the costume. How'd he get that $1,000 suit? Superman, on the other hand, feels a bit rushed to get to all the Superman stuff. We get a good segment on Krypton in the beginning, but I feel like we need more time to know Clark before becoming Superman. The whole setup feels very clunky too. Jonathan Kent gives Clark a small talk about being meant for greatness and then dies. Then right after, Clark discovers a crystal that creates the Fortress of Solitude, but it's literally just a crystal. How did Clark know to take it to the Arctic and throw it in the ice? The crystal didn't come with instructions or anything. Clark just knows exactly what to do to progress the plot. So overall, I think Spider-Man's plot feels more natural, better explained, and better paced. Another similarity between Spider-Man and Superman is their characters. Both Clark and Peter are clumsy, awkward, and old-fashioned guys who work for a newspaper whose names both start with The Daily. They were both raised by the elderly, so it makes sense that they're overly polite and awkward. Thank God Peter isn't an annoying emo in this movie. Those were dark times. Peter is very likable in Spider-Man, and his character is presented very fluidly. We see him geek out about the smallest things like the largest electron microscope on the eastern seaboard, and the fact that some spiders can defend themselves by camouflaging. And we really see how Peter awkwardly tries to talk to girls. What makes Peter work well in Spider-Man is that we see how nice and respectable he is to others, so we feel for him when he's being bullied or getting the living Shrek beaten out of him by the Goblin. We also really get to see how he develops into Spidey, and the moral journey he goes on. I talked about it a bit already. The thing is, even when Peter's making irresponsible decisions, we understand why. He never does anything mind-numbingly stupid. No, he's relatable. His mistakes make him more human to the audience. He likes Mary Jane and he wants to impress her by winning a car cause he sees she's into that. He uses his powers to win a wrestling match against Randy Savage to earn money. After being conned of $2,900, Peter sees a thief rob the guy who cheated him and lets the thief get away. If a guy ripped me off of that kind of money, I'd let him get robbed too. This of course results in Uncle Ben getting shot and yada yada responsibility. So even though Peter is a likable guy, we get to see him personally grow into the suit. Mary Jane is also pretty good too. Kirsten Dunst, although not the best actress, is quite good in this. MJ isn't necessarily the bold 10 out of 10 catch that she was in the comics, but I did like what the movie did with her. She has a rough, abusive home life that she shrugs off to become a party girl when her friends are around. But unfortunately, Spider-Man and Superman for that matter, both followed a damsel in distress trope. It's been overdone a lot, and is thankfully outdated at this point. And Mary Jane screaming is really obnoxious.
Oh, then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming.
We are who we choose to be. Now choose!
Like I mentioned in my Spider-Man 2 video, all the side characters are great too. Rosemary Harris as Aunt May was brilliant casting, and Cliff Robertson was a great Uncle Ben. Their relationship to each other and with Peter are very believable, and I'm glad that we get to see a lot of that. James Franco did a really good job as Peter's rich, out-of-touch best friend Harry Osborn. Again, you really buy his friendship with Peter, and his dilemma with Norman Osborn is very well realized. He struggles to impress his father, and always gets pushed to the side as Norman relates more to Peter, as they both have a love of science. And what else is there to say about J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson? 10 years and 3 movies past this series, and still no one's dared to cast this character again. Simmons is just that good in Spider-Man. The characters in Superman are also very good. Of course, starting with Superman himself, Christopher Reeve is the perfect Superman. Whenever I think of the character, this is the version that always comes to mind. He just so perfectly performed both the bold, impressive Boy Scout in Superman, and the old-fashioned, awkward, and clumsy Clark Kent. A lot of people joke about how all Clark needs are glasses for nobody to recognize him, but this movie actually made me understand why that works. He's a completely different person when he has the glasses. So it's not just the glasses that's different, but his mannerisms, his voice, and how he presents himself are completely different. Both sides are very fun to watch. Superman is such a fun character, again, in a world that seems lacking in optimism, so he stands out even more. Like I said before, I just wish we got to see Clark transform into Superman a bit more. We're given teenage Clark in one scene and then Superman in the next. Apparently he was learning all the secrets of the universe in his Fortress of Solitude for 12 years, but we don't see any of it. So why he loves people so much, I can't really tell. Why he wears his underwear on the outside of his pants, still don't know. I also thought Lois Lane was great in Superman. Margot Kidder did excellent in the role. Lois is very headstrong, and she's borderline pessimistic from being a journalist who writes about murderers and rapists. She's very different than other female leads in movies. Superman's biological father Jor-El, is also done excellently, and I really liked his segment on Krypton. I'm very split between the characters. On one hand, I thought Reeves absolutely nailed the character and gave two unique performances in one. Both sides of Superman are very funny and charming. Although Tobey Maguire isn't as remarkable in Spider-Man, we do see more character development. Then there's the love interest. What Mary Jane has going on is a great take on the classic character, but I did enjoy seeing the hardened Lois Lane a bit more. I think I'm gonna give this round to Spider-Man because the side characters push it over the edge for me. None of the side characters in Superman are that memorable. Even the Kents barely get any screen time. Jonathan dies after 2 scenes, and then Clark finds that nonsense crystal. A minute or 2 later, we never see Martha again.
What does that mean? Why did you say that name?
Why did you say that name?
I felt as though Superman needed more development. We didn't get enough time spent with him to see him develop into Superman. We really just get the teenage years and then Superman, but nothing in between that. We don't see him transition into the beloved hero. And to put it simply, J.K. Simmons.
Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is. A vigilante, a public menace. What's he doing on my front page?
Mr. Jameson, your wife is on line 1. She needs to know if you...
Mr. Jameson, there's a page 6 problem.
We have a page 1 problem. Shut up.
Lex Luthor is the villain in Superman, and he's very reminiscent of the villains of the previous decade. He's somewhere in between a Batman and Bond villain. He's a very conceited criminal mastermind who surrounds himself with idiots. Lex is extremely prideful and always sees himself as above everybody else. I love the reveal at the end that he's actually bald. Batman v Superman attempted a similar thing, where Lex, or Lex Jr., has hair for the majority of the movie, but then is shown bald at the very end. I don't know why this is a running thing. To feel better about himself, Lex has 2 idiot sidekicks that he loves to insult. Neither of them are really worth getting into because they don't stand out much. Lex Luthor's evil plan is interesting. So, he buys a bunch of land in the desert, steals nukes, and then blows up the San Andreas Fault so California separates from the rest of North America. This would cause the land he has in the desert to be on the new coastline, so the land value will go way up. Yes, that's right. The villain plot revolves around real estate. Alright. Spider-Man's villain is the Green Goblin. Peter Parker's best friend's dad, Norman, is the owner of a large tech company, but the military is going to pull their funding unless they successfully test a new performance-enhancing serum almost immediately. Basically, the same thing that Captain America had, but it makes you go crazy. Rush for time, Norman tests it on himself and turns into the Green Goblin. I find the Goblin really interesting. This half of Norman is like the other, but dialed up to 11. The Goblin takes very extreme measures to make things better for Norman. He kills his competitors and Oscorp's board after they ousted him from his own business. So the Goblin works for Norman. It's a very interesting dilemma. Willem Dafoe is amazing in this role. He is so good that they brought him back for both sequels. So after killing the Oscorp board, he tries to get Spider-Man out of the way so he can just keep doing whatever he wants, whatever benefits Norman. He even tries the whole team up thing from Star Wars, which is kind of out there. I get where the Goblin is coming from. They're both superhuman and can serve themselves at the expense of the rest of the city, like the Goblin has been doing. I'll talk a bit more about it later. The Green Goblin and Lex Luthor are completely different. One is interested in property value, while the other likes to use his powers to make his own life easier, because everyone knows there's no problem that can't be solved by ruthless violence. So, as far as villains go, I think the Green Goblin is better than Lex Luthor. So, we all know the line, with great power comes great responsibility. Since I was just on the subject of the Green Goblin, let's recall what I just said like 5 seconds ago. Norman uses his powers for his own self-benefit, and doesn't care about how many lives he squanders to do it. You can say that he's using his powers irresponsibly. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? This is why the movie has him invite Spider-Man to join him on his selfish rampage. Norman hasn't learned to be responsible with his talents, but Spider-Man has, which is why he refuses. He already learned what happens when he doesn't use his powers correctly. So we have one character that's learned about responsibility and one that hasn't. You might even say that testing out the performance enhancers was irresponsible and reckless. There's another theme in Spider-Man about father figures. We never see Peter's biological father, but he is referenced. We don't know how long his parents have been dead, but Uncle Ben has taken it upon himself to raise Peter as his own. And because Ben's not his biological father, when he tries to direct Peter, he completely ignores the lesson of responsibility that Ben's trying to provide. After he gets killed, Peter moves in with Norman and Harry. Norman treats Peter as his son and neglects Harry, who he sees as a disappointment. Peter sees how evil Norman is, and by the end he accepts Uncle Ben as his true father when Norman tries to reach out to him in a last-ditch effort. He rejected the rich and gifted father figure for the wise and loving one. Superman has some pretty big themes too. Like I said before, it's about a god learning to be human. The story of Superman takes a lot of inspiration from Jesus. An alien comes to Earth, is raised as a human by normal people, and when he grows up, he uses his powers to save everyone else. There's always this question of how far his abilities can go. Can he even save people from death? Like Lazarus, Superman is able to bring Lois back to life by reversing time. This transitions into the other theme in Superman, mortality. Superman is invincible until Lex figures out to use kryptonite. And Lex himself, with all his wealth and status, is aging, as seen by his bald head. And Clark realized that even with all his powers, he still couldn't save Pa Kent. And by the end, he does the impossible and reverses time to save Lois. I find that a bit odd. It's similar to, I'm sorry for saying this, Batman and Robin. Alfred is sick and tells Bruce that he can't stop death. But Bruce does save Alfred in the end. So can Superman just go all the way back in time to when Pa Kent was going to die and fly him to the hospital? Again, I'm giving the themes to Spider-Man because it really nails the lesson of responsibility and has a nice and subtle theme about father figures. Meanwhile, Superman reminded me of Batman and Robin, so there's that. Of course, both being fun superhero movies, there's going to be a lot of action in each. There are a lot of great moments in Superman. Two of my favorites are the mugging and the helicopter scenes. The mugging scene really contrasted Clark's and Lois's personalities. Lois, being very brash, tries to fight back against the armed thug, while Clark actually tries to talk him down in a very wimpy way. And when his gun goes off, Clark catches the bullet. Just such a classic moment. And there's the helicopter scene. Really the first time we see Superman saving the day.
God, look up there.
The hell is that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
Well, I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
Right.
In my opinion, it's easily the best scene Superman's ever had on film. It perfectly captures that comic book fun and wonder from the source material, and Superman's Boy Scout light-hearted character. There are a couple of other really good action scenes too, like when he brings in a boat full of criminals. A lot of the tone and superhero stuff feels very similar to the Batman TV series from the previous decade. There's just that same sense of lighthearted fun. Superman the movie is also really funny. There are a lot of adult jokes in the movie that some of the kids might not get. Also, John Williams composed a very memorable score for Superman. But there is one sequence that bugs me. So, Lois and Superman are having a wonderful Peter Pan moment after the hilarious interview she gives him, and then she ruins it. They're having what would probably be one of the most remarkable scenes in cinema, but Lois starts reciting this really lame poem in her head. Ugh, that was so frustrating. I'm really impressed with the action in Spider-Man. A lot of the fight scenes are creative and sometimes comedic. The fights between him and the Green Goblin are of course the best ones, especially in the end. The climactic battle between the two is so awesome. It's separated into two parts. The first half is the part I previously mentioned, where the New Yorkers come to the rescue and help Spider-Man save everyone. It's just such a great scene, even outside of the historical context. Peter Parker is just a normal kid who decides to use his powers to help others. Now we have other average Joes coming to support him. Then, the second half of this battle is the Green Goblin just completely pummeling Spider-Man. It's such a gripping and brutal scene. You feel every punch and kick, and you're on the edge of your seat as the hero gets the life beaten out of him. Besides that, there are a lot of other great scenes, like him and Mary Jane swinging, the iconic upside down kiss, the wrestling match, and practically every scene of Jameson. Lastly, I really like the montage of the different New Yorkers giving their opinions on Spider-Man. I don't know, it's just such a nice scene. And finally, I can't talk about Spider-Man without mentioning the brilliant soundtrack. This is Danny Elfman at his absolute best. So, overall, which one had better action? Well, once again, I think I have to give it to Spider-Man. Although Superman does have some amazing scenes, I feel more invested in the action in Spider-Man. It feels more personal and gripping, but you still have all the fun from Superman. Also, the scenes with Mary Jane are done better than those with Lois. Lois just shot her big moment in the foot. Both Spider-Man and Superman are historic movies. They're both timeless classics, while also reminding us of the dark times that these bright heroes came from. They both have excellent soundtracks, characters, acting, and are tons of fun. But in the end, which one is better? Is it the more modern Spider-Man or last century's Superman? The winner is...
The Amazing Spider-Man!
Although Christopher Reeve is the Superman and Lois is a great female lead, Spider-Man has everything Superman has and then some. The villain is better, the action gets more intense, and we really see the origin of Spider-Man. So, congratulations to Spider-Man. See you guys next week.